So if we go into the first question, Trump attacking the World Health Organization, calling them very China-centric. What do you think about that?
In his comments, yeah, he usually uses this words China-centric or Chinese virus. That's
Kung flu.
just
He
to,
called it the Kung flu.
yeah, or just it's most like personal opinion. It's mostly done to highlight the place of origin of the virus. And secondly, let's not forget that these two countries at the moment they're economically in. It's not a war, not a battle, but in rivalry.
It's a big rivalry, isn't it? Like one power
Yeah.
is rising and the other one's falling.
Yes, and just before you mentioned before this started as well, Chinese virus because they were the first ones actually to avoid telling the world that this can be a pandemic or a world
Yeah.
crisis. So as we said, Taiwan in Taipei, they reported to WHO that there is a potential threat to the world on 31st of December, but it was ignored because it wasn't done publicly by
So
Beijing, which is
so
the
um
capital.
who ignored? So sorry. Which group ignored? Which group? Sorry.
WHO.
Yeah, ignored
They ignored um, the
Taiwan.
statement that Taipei did on
Tai,
31st of
tai, tai, tai,
December.
Taipei is the capital of Taiwan, right?
Yes, yes.
So they ignored. Would you say, if you were going to phrase it, would you say they ignored Taiwan or they ignored Taipei?
Um,
It's a pedant. I'm being pedantic with the language thing, but just I think
Taiwan. Yeah, let's say
yeah.
Taiwan.
Okay, let's say Taiwan then, just in case, because not everyone would know where Taipei is.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be a bit easier for everyone. So they ignored. So okay, if we start with this, the preface of the Chinese, essentially the World Health Organization took the word of China over Taiwan, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
believe Taiwan aren't a member of the World Health Organization because China have said they're not allowed to be in the group.
Yes,
Essentially,
yes, and because US, let's say because WHO didn't really pay attention to that as a threat, that's why I guess it started all this not war, but just this, let's say,
rhetoric.
arguments among Trump and WHO, because as we know, and as Trump said himself, they are actually the biggest investors in the World Health Organization.
China or
So
the US.
yeah, yeah, I guess
Which
they
one?
should have in a way concentrate on countries that really needed help. China is one of them,
One
but
of
to
them,
be
yeah.
equal towards all the countries
Um,
and not react just to when a capital is saying. If there is any threat coming from any part of the world, it has to be checked because I think that is the main duty and responsibility of this organization at the end of the day.
yeah, I think that there was a lot of people messed up and bungled it. So I think the Chinese deserve a lot of blame in part because they covered it up essentially. Did you
Yeah.
read? I think the story came out today that the Chinese deaths are actually far higher than they said it was. So China have admitted. I think it's about another 1,000 people have died.
Y-
The number's about 1,300 higher, I think, than what they originally said it was.
yes, that's another thing. Let's say that let's know not to get away from the fact that in China all the news are censored, so
Yeah,
everything that comes out of China it goes through many filters before it. So I definitely can say that potentially the numbers are even much higher. However, at the end of the day, they accepted that there was an issue with that. And that tells other thing that not just in China, but in all the parts of the world, whatever the official number is, we should expect the real number to be much higher
much higher.
than.
Yeah, we know UK's numbers are wrong because they're not reporting the deaths outside of hospitals, only the ones inside hospitals. So our numbers are wrong as well. But I think Trump is in part right in blaming China, essentially because it's like they've done something wrong and they haven't told anyone. It's just gone worse, and they
Yes.
consistently. It seems like they either didn't realize what they were dealing with, so incompetency, or they were lying to the World Health Organization. I don't. Which one? Which one do you think it could be? Because there's always I guess it's the argument of Occam's Hamlin's razor, which is don't attribute malice to where you can attribute incompetency. But there's also Occam's razor, which is the most likely explanation is probably the most likely one. The most reasonable explanation, I think, is the most likely one. So, do you think the Chinese lied to the World Health Organization to try and keep their economy going, or do you think that they just really had no idea what they were dealing with?
To be honest, I think that at the beginning there was just this imagination that we can deal with this virus. However, we need to accept that a lot of people go to China and come from China. So that's why the outbreak is so high. Maybe they didn't expect this to grow to such a big scale, and
Yeah,
that's why the reply about the pandemic came just before the Lunar New Year.
yeah, because a lot of Chinese workers would have went on a break for the Lunar New Year. But what I guess I'm asking you is the fact that do you think that the original Chinese response was one of sort of they didn't realize what they were dealing with, or do you think they tried to bury this because they knew that if an outbreak happened, it would essentially tank the Chinese economy and also cause a lot of problems
Yes,
worldwide?
yes. They thought they personally, I think they thought that they would be able to deal with the virus themselves. And in order to avoid any economic conflict, any outbreaks, any conflicts, bad reputation, I think this was just a wrong game
Because
because they didn't say it to the world, and
because
this could have been stopped before. However, it's now done, so we have to deal with what we have. But yes, I do think that they didn't want to get into any economic defaults or economic decrease, let's say,
it's important to
decline.
yeah, it's important to make the point that we're not trying to be, Monday morning quarterback. We're not trying to say that, if we were in this position, we would have done something differently. Because
No,
it's not my area of expertise, and it kind of it's not really yours either, is it?
no.
No. So
We're here just to see what happened and what could have been avoided.
and so
However, based on that, we can say how maybe things can be changed. Because again,
and I
many
think
people comment what happened, but it's good to think about what can happen and how
and so
things can be improved.
I think it's important to mention that the World Health Organization were incredibly naive to, I guess, listen to what China was saying. I think originally, without doing some actual research in it themselves, because
Yeah.
they were saying that it's not going human to human contact, and then Taiwan were like, yes, it is, and then the World Health Organization, because they were listening to China, were like, nah, it isn't, and then we realized in January that actually this thing's terrible, and it's a lot more contagious than I think anyone really realized at the time. But then at the same time, I think the World Health Organization do deserve a lot of blame initially, and also the Chinese government. However, I also believe that I don't think they're being they are being slightly China centric, but not massively. And I think that a lot of nation states do deserve blame after the outbreak hit each country. I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's to say that look, it's not just China's fault. It's there's a multitude of countries to blame here. But I like to call the World Health Organization China centric. I think is very very unfair, and it goes into Trump's playbook of sort of deflecting blame essentially.
Yeah, that's the thing. Looking for whom to blame for that. Again, we have to admit that numbers in US are much higher than they were in China as well. So that tells about the control itself. That maybe in China it has been handled better.
So yeah, I know that, but obviously China's an authoritarian country. Just going back to the question quickly. Yeah, I think it's very
Yeah.
unfair to call the World Health Organization China centric. I think they're going to learn some very harsh lessons, some very very harsh lessons from this one. Is don't be so naive as to believe everything a nation state tells you to. I mean, the World Health Organization said China had no reason to lie to us, but realistically they did because they needed to keep their economy going.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's
But
different.
but I think that the World Health Organization would have made that mistake from the vast majority of countries. Any Western country, or I think sort of like one of the BRIC countries, if they had told the World Health Organization that nah, there's no problem here, man, I think they would have believed them.
Yes.
Do you think so?
Yes.
So I think that
Yes, yes, because it's, for example, if we're thinking about the US example, if it comes from Washington, it would be another reaction that it would have come from, let's say, a smaller city like Kansas City, something like that. Still a big city, but
Kansas is a state, I think.
and the city as well.
Is it a city as well?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, if it came out of Kansas City. Okay. America's a weird place like that. They have some strange names for everything.
Mm, all the places are different.
Yeah. Okay, let's carry on. Anyway, so if it came out of Kansas or Nevada or
Just any smaller place, let's say. Less
would
important economically and politically. That's the thing.
yeah, I think like the Ebola crisis, they dealt with it quite effectively because they realised that stopping a pandemic, really a global pandemic, they got involved in these countries, they shut things down. There were some initial problems with talking to village leaders about what the problems are, but once they spoke to the actual like people in charge
Yeah.
in the villages and stuff, they realised that okay, there's certain cultural practices we need to remember, need to explain to people that you can't bury dead people because they still have the disease. So rather than going in there, and like, your family member goes in, never comes out, at least you'll understand that, they've caught the illness and they're doing their best to save them. I feel like that
Yeah.
if the Ebola crisis, if the Ebola, not Ebola, sorry, if COVID-19 came from, I think, an underdeveloped country or what was wrongfully described as a third world country, like
Yeah.
I don't know,
Less
even
developed, let's
yeah,
say.
even like a Bangladesh, for example, if it came out of somewhere like there, I feel like World Health Organization would be like, we need to go in there and see what's going on. But I feel like because it came out of China, the World Health Organization would be like, we trust these guys. They're not going to lie to us. So I feel like they were incredibly naive from that
Yeah.
perspective. What do you think?
Um, yes, I do think that if it's a smaller country, and again, the power of the countries, let's say third world countries that you said, is not that high as it is in China, so it's easier to intervene in other economies in other countries to stop if anything comes. However, China being second largest economy in the world with their own health system, social systems in place, not being part of any other, like being part of other organizations, but not WHO, I don't think they had any chance to go there, see what is happening without any authorization.
I think they would have been refused as well, refused access.
Yes, yes.
So
So that's the thing. They don't have authorization to work there. So, to be honest, I don't think it would have made a change anyway. And in a way, it's good that China did the call late, but it was done.
I feel like if China denied them access, I feel like if this was, say, in December, very extremely early January, then I feel like the World Health Organization would be like, something's going on here. Either you let us in or we're ringing the alarm. But at the same time, the World Health Organization had been warning since January of a potential pandemic, and a lot of countries didn't realize at the time. I have a lot of sympathy for like Italy because I feel like they were caught unaware. Because I think it was people coming from China into Italy, and they were just absolutely destroyed. So I have a lot of sympathy for those countries, but I feel like the UK and the US, we were a few weeks behind them, and we could have
Yes.
done a lot better. So I think that Trump is essentially, it's obvious what he's doing. He's trying to blame everyone else apart from
Yeah.
himself. He's going to blame, Europe, China, the World Health Organization, the Democrats, Bill De Blasio, Andrew Cuomo, everyone. Probably blame us soon, if we were big names. The
Um,
fake news
but
media.
again, about that, don't forget that the elections are coming soon, and
Yeah,
everyone needs their reputation and image to be brought up. So
yeah. I mean,
that
that's why
can be
the
something of that as well.
Yeah, you're not wrong, but I feel like I think it's fair to criticize the World Health Organization on this one. I would call them incredibly naive and very, very silly because these guys are. I think these guys would be more medical professionals rather than politics people, and so they would come off the belief that these people wouldn't lie to us. But I feel like if they had some more politics people in, they might, or economists in, they realize that actually they might lie to us because they need to keep their country going, and regardless of what's going on. So maybe that's something who we need to think about in the future of maybe having some political experts on board to help them understand, essence of spin and other things, because nation states always lie to people. Um, and so,
And that's that's correct. But also, as I mentioned before, if you want to intervene, like if any international organization, as World Health Organization, want to intervene in a country, they can they can go in a country where in a country that is part of this organization, and taking into consideration that China is not part of World Health Organization, they cannot intervene if China doesn't allow them to come.
So,
So as long as Beijing didn't make the call, they didn't have any, in a way, authorization to act anything on their behalf.
and I feel like they need to include Taiwan into anything because we've had two dangerous diseases, I believe, come out of China in the
Yes.
last few decades. There was the SARS outbreak, and then there's this. So, I would probably include Taiwan into this because Taiwan have dealt with the outbreak very well. They've been prepared purely because of the SARS outbreak, I believe, and so they dealt with this really quickly. I think they and Taiwan
Yes.
and South Korea have done absolute madness and just dealt with it really well. But I feel like the country that's dealt with it best is North Korea because they found a guy with coronavirus and shot him. Jesus, he's first infected, just kill him.
Oh,
Yeah, it's like saying a zombie for a minute. It's like, he's been bitten, kill him.
isolation.
Yeah, it's crazy. They didn't even try and help the geezer. They're just like, bang, and you're dead. So, yeah. So I reckon North Korea death rates might be quite high. Or the infection rate might be higher depending on if they caught how early they caught it. Because if the idea if I tell someone I've got coronavirus, I'm gonna die. No one's gonna tell anyone. So I think North Korea potentially could get hit quite badly as well.
Yes.
So yeah. So just to conclude on this question, I believe that it's right to criticize the World Health Organization, um, call them naive, but China centric. I think that's very unfair. That's extremely
No,
unfair.
that is not fair because everyone is involved in it, and you can't blame just one country.